Our first scripture reading today is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 31 through 40. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." The word of the Lord.
Our second scripture reading is from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. He entered into Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
On this year's mission trip, we focused on the importance of community. We watched as people depended on each other for support in the toughest of circumstances. We also witnessed little details that seemed to make people's lives run smoothly, despite the fact that they have barriers, like not speaking English or having limited resources. For example, there's a summer camp called Kirk of Kildare, which provides free and reduced breakfast and lunch to impoverished children. The families depend on the church to provide the free meals that their children can normally receive during the school year throughout the summer. This way, parents do not have to sacrifice the health of their children in order to make ends meet. I was stationed at the nursery because I love babies. Babies are adorable regardless of the status they were born into. At the nursery, 3 women came together to drop off their children and pick them up. They seemed to be friends with one another. When the children were picked up, I noticed that only one of the 3 spoke English. When I talked to the other 2 of them, she translated for them. They had created a system of support for each other in order to communicate with me and with everyone else who only spoke English. Another example is when we worked at a refugee site. Parents in the community gathered to learn English in an ESOL class, and we were tasked with entertaining their children for the duration of the class. We played games with them, made bracelets, had snack, and really just had a good time. I recognized that the community had built a way to comfortably and easily allow themselves to become acquainted with American culture without needing to focus on little details like childcare, transportation, and money. Imagine how stressful it would be if this opportunity was not available to help them build productive lives and be able to care for their children. This brings me to my third example. On Friday, we ate at a restaurant called A Place at the Table, which is a pay-what-you-can restaurant. This means that if you were to eat there, you needed to pay at least half of the suggested price, or you would have to volunteer to pay for it. This way, if a person does not have the money to pay for their food, they still have the ability to get it. The woman at the restaurant explained to us that they have regulars who get their lunch and then volunteer for it every day. She also said they have people who come into the restaurant and pay much more than the suggested price, allowing them to feed so many more people. The community this restaurant has created demonstrates support. The restaurant is supported by the volunteers they need to keep the kitchen running, while those in need are provided with an alternate way to pay for their food so they don't have to feel ashamed when they can't pay. This, in turn, allows them to have self-respect and be able to save their money for the future. In the short time we spent in Raleigh, we were able to comprehend the importance of community as we built our own community among our PPC team. People should not be expected to figure out everything for themselves. It takes a village, and we were able to see this in action. We also built friendships that made our experience richer, and I know that if my brother and I ever needed something, we would be able to reach out to anyone on this trip for help.
Hello, my name is Chandler Kuhn, and I am a rising junior at Walt Whitman High School. This past week, our mission team traveled to Raleigh, North Carolina, where we were called to work with the people in need rather than for them. The first day, I was part of a small group that visited an apartment complex that housed refugees. These families, having fled their countries for a better life, came to our country with nothing but their spirit, hope, and culture from their old homes. While a group of adult volunteers worked to provide the parents with English-speaking education, our group provided recreational entertainment for the children. My experience involved running around the backyard of an apartment complex with a soccer ball. Omar, Abdi, and John, all from Somalia, were three of the kids I met and played with on the field that day. We played in an area with dirt and little grass and used logs and a broken electrical box cover to mark our goals. Some of the kids didn't have shoes on, and we had to be careful to avoid areas of the field that had broken glass. Despite all of this and the 95-degree sun, there was plenty of joy to be had. The next day, a group of us spent a half a day at a nonprofit recovery facility for individuals with alcohol and drug problems. We started in the detox center, seeing men on small cots in rows as their bodies released themselves of harmful substances. During our visit, we were accompanied by two men who were in the program and who showed us around the facilities. Joel and Drew have both struggled with heroin addiction, and both have almost died from overdoses of this lethal drug. Externally, Drew, only being 20 years old, had a lot going for him. He was a really good student, athlete, and had a promising future. Unfortunately, his family and support system all are addicts, and he fell victim to the disease himself. His parents are in the same facility. His brother is in prison, and his two half-brothers are active users. I was struck by his honesty and courage to overcome his disease, and it was eye-opening to see the powerful effect drugs and alcohol can have on people and their families. The third work day we spent with Habitat for Humanity, physically working on a home in a community full of affordable housing built by volunteers. It was humbling to be a part of a team of laborers who give of their time and resources for the underserved. We left at the end of the day satisfied that the housing project was one day closer to completion. Our group was able to make a difference for the future homeowners and feel like we made a difference working a full day of labor. In Luke's scripture, we learn that we are not to judge others, no matter their situation, politics, economics, or hardships. We are taught to spread the good news of the gospel and that everyone deserves to be and feel loved. In Matthew's scripture, God challenges us as believers and followers to separate ourselves from pretenders and unbelievers. The real evidence of our belief is the way we act, and to treat others as Jesus would have treated them. This past week, I had many opportunities to put my faith into action. However, I also don't need to go on a mission trip or even be a member of a church to live out my faith. God asks us to be present every day, aware of others' needs, and to willfully help them. In this past week, God was with us in the spirit of healing, the healing of the refugees, the addicts, and the poor. Healing can be described in many different ways and to many different degrees. We all need it, just not all in the same way. Our group this week focused on a specific town, Raleigh, but the problems of poverty, addiction, and need from healing is everywhere around us, right down the street even. God calls on us and teaches us that you don't have to save a whole world to make a difference. The important thing is to at least try and save one person at a time.
Hello, my name is Eliza Asbury. I'm going to be a senior at Churchill High School. In today's society, many people have become invisible. Many people are forgotten. Jack Dager can attest to this, as we almost left him at a rest stop yesterday. But really, being forgotten is probably one of my biggest fears, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. We walk by people sleeping on the streets, never even looking down to acknowledge their existence. I'm guilty of this too. However, in Raleigh, I think we were all compelled to open up our eyes. The whole trip was centered around seeing the invisible, helping with injustice, and experiencing the greater problems at hand. I don't think we necessarily had to drive 6 hours to see poverty and people who need our help. The same situation exists in almost every city, in DC, in the rural areas, and in our own community. However, I do think it was helpful to see up close the living situation of the invisible in our society and interact with them face to face. So in that case, going to Raleigh was necessary. We all had the opportunity to meet and talk with many of society's forgotten ones. As I tutored 2 refugee kids and played soccer with them, it was easy to see how little they had. They are true outsiders to our country, but somehow their smiles never left their faces. The 2 little boys I was helping were going into 5th grade and were struggling to read a 1st grade level book. English is not their first language, making the adjustment in the country even harder. Similar to Matthew 25, verses 31 through 40, Jesus calls us to be as sheep and to go out into the world and serve the outsider. And when we serve the outsider, the forgotten, the hungry, the refugee, Jesus tells us we are serving him and serving in his image. We, as sheep, have done nothing to earn God's love and forgiveness, and by serving others are in no means doing it for salvation. However, serving others is the fruit of salvation. Unlike the goats, who were given the choice to minister to the Lord and did nothing, the sheep are living in his name because they serve. The day after going to the refugee center, we also got the chance to go to an addiction center. I went to the one for women called Healing Transitions. It was really amazing to not only see how much needs to be done to help these women fight their disease, but also how much they have to overcome, or how much they overcame, sorry. As we talked with them for a few hours and talked to the residents, 2 of them mentioned that without the mercy and support from Christ, their journey to a clean and healthy life would have been quite impossible. Some of the women were extremely open with our group and told us parts of their story and answered all the questions we had. I am still in awe of their bravery and compassion in telling us. It is obvious that they felt forgotten or their life was so difficult that they felt they needed a coping mechanism. I always hear about the opioid crisis on the news, but never fully understood its extent until this trip. In all our experiences this week, as we served, we were also learning so much. Just like in Luke 19, verses 1 through 10, we are called to love the outsider and accept them. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector which made him an automatic outsider. However, Christ was still willing to stay at his house, giving him the respect Zacchaeus did not receive from others. Time and again, Jesus is talking with the outsider and teaching them about his merciful way. From the woman at the well to the leper to the blind man, Jesus had no limit. Christ did not judge, so when we are living by his name, we should not judge but live with the same care he did. There is no line or criteria for a person to be saved by Jesus, whether it be me or you, or the refugee, or the addict, or the homeless. We need to go out into the world seeing everyone as Christ sees them.